Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over a game that I played a while ago called Shadow of the Colossus. It is Game Day Friday. Shadow of the Colossus was originally released for PlayStation 2, and then got a re-release for the PlayStation 4. It's an amazing game dealing with, obviously, taking down giant colossi, but there's very deep, meaningful story here because of the reason why he wants to do so. He wants to resurrect the feminine. He wants to resurrect this girl called Mono. So we're going to get into this a little bit and what calls out to us here and how this actually echoes a lot of reality and man's resistance to the divine. So I hope you stick with me on this. So there's this lady I knew who worked for Honda, and she got into some trouble. It was pretty hardcore, and she had the choice. She could either resign or she'd be fired. And so she left on her own accord. That's there you go. There's the joke. I've been told I should tell those instead of being so serious all the time, but dad jokes are like all I got. It's in the name of the channel. Anyway, Shadow of the Colossus is just an amazing game. It's extremely artistic. I know I kind of lack visual representation of what I'm talking about, so what I'm trying to do is get a little bit better with the storytelling aspect. So the game starts out where you are a character named Wanderer. The character's name is not really known. It's not really important, but it's a male character. And he's riding his horse into this forbidden land. And in this forbidden land, it's like decayed, archaic structures. He goes into this temple. And in this temple, he lays this feminine figure down. Her name is Mono. She's died. And then he starts talking to this like disembodied voice. The disembodied voice name is Dorim, and that's important later. So it's pretty beautiful. You can see birds flying. There's like light coming through the ceiling there. And he wants her to be resurrected, and he claims she had a cursed life, so she had to be sacrificed, and he wants to bring her back. And Dorim says, you can't violate the nature of things. You can't bring back the dead, but perhaps there is a way. And then he sends you out to go after these colossi, these giant mammoth structures made of like hair and I don't know if they're mechanical necessarily, but they're certainly animated. And you were like, this compared to me, like you're super small, and the whole thing is just taken out. I think there's 9 of them. I could be mistaken on that. But you take out these colossi, and it's tough, man, and that's the whole game. You do that, and you get a few cutscenes here and there. During the course of the game, when you strike these colossi, what happens is you pierce them with a sword in their weak spot, wherever the light is etched onto them, and they like bleed darkness. When you defeat a colossi, the darkness goes inside you. You absorb a little bit of that. And eventually, like the whole picture of yourself changes. You eventually get darker and you look less human and more like something else as you go down this road. But he's doing this for Mono. She had a cursed fate. The other thing you get to hear is like a disembodied voice. Well, not really. You see a mask of the tribal leader. I think his name is Enam. And he tries to, warn you, don't do this. But obviously, this is a very linear progression. I mean, you could stop playing the game. But besides that, if you want to see what the ending is, you get to obviously got to keep going. Out of all the colossi, I got to say the bird one was like the toughest one for me to get for some reason. I kept falling off it, man, into the water. It was so frustrating, but that's besides the point. So you spend your time getting these colossi one by one, all in hopes of resurrecting your... And it doesn't even say specifically that he's in love with her, but they are roughly the same age. At least it looks like it. He wants to save her because she has a cursed fate. So that's maybe like the agency, man going after women, that kind of thing. She didn't deserve her fate. And he's going to stand up against that. And he's going to struggle with it. Because the way that Dorman actually says is appointed for people to die. And he's resisting that. And that's what the name Israel means. Those who struggle with God. So if you lose something that you're extremely attached to with your identity, I mean, that makes sense, right? You also die too. And you don't like that. That hurts. And you want to struggle against that as much as you can. If there's a way to bring somebody back, well, we're going to give it a shot. So at the end of it, your character Wanderer has so much of this darkness inside of him, and your tribal leaders show up. And they are going to put an end to this because they know what will happen if you get all the darkness in you. And they try to kill you. They shoot you with multiple arrows, and they stab you. But you've already absorbed the darkness. And you literally become Dorim. And you get to play as the monster for a little bit. Until the shaman casts a spell on a sword throws it into the lake, and then this giant light comes out and absorbs your character. It like sucks you in like a vacuum. It sucks all the darkness out of you, but you eventually get pulled into that as well. And then that's it. And then the shaman and the tribal people that were with him run away. The bridge between, I guess, the world he came from and the temple collapses. That like severs connection to that realm. Later on, what you see is the girl actually wakes up. She came back to life. She goes over to where the pool is, where you got sucked in. There's no water there anymore. You're now an infant, and you have horns on. And the game ends with her picking you up in her arm, following a horse up this garden path into a garden. And that's it. The game ends. So that game had a huge following. It still does, really. And it is a marvelous game. It really is. The music and everything, I'd strongly recommend giving it a chance. So what does that mean? Why does the whole thing call out to us? Besides the music, there is something about music that really touches the soul. When you pair words and sound, I mean, we sing our words with our inflections. I'm singing something right now, otherwise I'd talk like a robot. So obviously, we sing a little bit. It's when you emphasize the song part of it. It's almost like it's more serious. The things you say are more serious. It's one of the reasons I'm diagnosing music on this channel, per se, because I want to go toward the things that, if all the words can be taken seriously, provided you have music to them, why these specific words? Why these specific meanings and combinations, and what calls out to us that makes us be like, yeah, that is heavy. That's good. And we call it good. We dub it good, and we keep listening to it. So what is it about that? Back to Shadow of the Colossus. So a game with a good story, almost like you play it for the story. That's usually how that works. I mean, that's like how all games work, roughly. I like Risk of Rain, too. That's like the one that's challenging for me. But even then, that has a deep story, man. But you have to look for it in like the lore. So what are we watching? What calls out to us in Shadow of the Colossus? Well, I couldn't get away from it before. If you lose somebody, you're going to argue with God about that. It's appointed once for man to die. If you want to change reality, where death is no longer your curse, you're going to have to take almost like an infinite curse onto yourself. There's a way that structure works. And you can say, at least this is what I was thinking, his culture represents how reality works. So his shaman and everything else. They stayed away from that. Dorim actually means Nimrod. It's Nimrod backwards. Nimrod was the guy that is said to have started to build the Tower of Babel, one of the men of renown of old. And that's when mankind tried to build a tower so high that you could touch the heavens. Now, you can take that literally, or I would say metaphorically. We build a system or a structure or a government so high, the individual doesn't have to worry about taking care of a thing. The system has it under control. And that's the ideal communistic world right there. And so when God looked at that in the Tower of Babel story, he looked down at it and he said, we can't have them do this, lest they make anything possible. So what is that? Is that stifling man's creativity? Is that making sure he can't reach the stars? I don't think so. I think what that is really is what Isaiah said. Woe to him who calls evil good and good evil. Child trafficking, that's a bad thing, right? Well, what if we just have our entire culture think it's good? That'd be a problem. Marquis de Sade said, why shouldn't I just torture people that are weaker than me? It's my right to. There's no God. It's my duty to myself to live for as much pleasure as possible. We can make that the cultural norm if everybody's under one roof and we lose the concept of language on the individual level. I think that's why the language was confused in that story. So that way people would be less part of a system, a systematic whole, and instead you're grouped into smaller groups and you need individual communication and relationships. And if you want to talk to somebody who speaks a different language, you have to learn it. You have to learn them, you have to learn their culture, and that gives you relationship and it gives you understanding. If you all have assumed language and culture, well, if the tower is so high, you're having no idea what the guys are down at the bottom are doing, and vice versa. You guys have way different concerns, but you never talk to each other. You just assume you know each other because you have the same language. So that's the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel wanted to make wrong right and right wrong. We're not too far away from putting intelligence into a machine and saying that's life. That's not quite the same thing. That's playing with electrons and playing with lights like this. But that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to make the dead alive again. But you can't do that, not in the finite world that we live in. And he resisted that. So in order to resist it, in order to figure out a way to bring the dead back to life, you have to have a little chaos inside of you. You need to push the envelope of structure. And he let so much chaos and so much darkness, because chaos and darkness go hand in hand. Darkness is just, you can't see what's in there. It could be anything. It's pure potential. But that's the thing. It could be anything. There could be a solution to what you want in the darkness. Oftentimes, solutions to your problems are right there. If anything, you need to articulate what the issue is. He did. But when it comes to life and death, that is something that's basically established. That can't be violated, lest we violate all of reality. And his whole culture saw this. God has laws that are pretty consistent. Gravity's a good one, so is light. So they tried to stop him, because if you let that much chaos into reality, into structure, it might even overwhelm you. That's like getting overwhelmed by emotion. You need emotion, you need agency, you need, compulsion, you need desire to help play with creativity. That helps things grow. And instead of moving on, he was held back by Mono. He was held back by something he lost. But you have to overcome that. And the ending, that's the beginning. The middle, you fight the Colossi. That's the fun part of the game. And at the end, you turn to this demon. The ending is amazingly significant because in order to set things right, he basically had to die. He had to have his identity wiped. But mankind, the spirit of mankind, was not destroyed. But there was evil in him, the potential to sin again. She was allowed to be resurrected, but she had no idea where she was, no idea who he was. She was just in the garden by herself with this lame horse and this child. So the feminine does what the feminine does, and she accepts responsibility and duty. I think it's a lot easier. Well, maybe not in the recent culture, but it's a lot easier for the feminine without other females passing it down to her. It almost like wells up within what her responsibility is, especially when there's an infant there in front of her. Like, that thing needs to be taken care of, because who else is going to do it? There wasn't necessarily a male figure then to take care of her in that place, and she was quite alone, but she did have a child. So that was potential, and Wanderer had to turn into pure potential and get rid of all of these ideas of messing with reality and life and death. And he had to be refreshed. I don't know, Christ uses an example of, like, if you want to come into the kingdom of heaven, you have to come as a little child. You have to come as innocent. You can't resist God. You have to ask questions and figure things out, and you have to constantly be learning and constantly be growing. Wanderer hit a point where, like, no, I'm going to violate the laws of nature because I want to. So he was doing it for her, but he was doing it for himself because of what he lost with her. So it was more selfish. It wasn't for her. It's not like he can ask her what she wants. Maybe he did before, I don't know. But we all die in the end. That's the reality of everything, of everybody. So what are you doing in the meantime, in the middle? And if someone leaves before you leave, how much of yourself is attached to them? Rather, you can attach yourself to somebody. I keep saying that oftentimes enough, that if you attach yourself to another person so much, part of you dies. That's actually kind of how things work. You have to. It's just how much more of your identity is put into something else that's ahead, where you know your responsibility to the rest of your family, friends, is to be like the strongest person at your father's funeral. You going to be the one that people lean on? Or are you going to be a sobbing mess when you should take up the mantle of leadership? So we're left at the end, the virgin and the child. But the end is kind of bittersweet, because in a vacuum, he did sacrifice himself for the virgin and the child. They came about because of what he did. But this was outside of culture. It was like its own thing. Because the bridge got separated at the end. That is almost like a holy and a sacred image given to us there. Even in that game, even in something as simple and fictional as Shadow of the Colossus, there is reason to hold the feminine and the child as sacred. And when we fail to do so, especially as the masculine in this role, when we fail to treat them as worthy of protecting, we are just dooming our own civilization. And we're even dooming ourselves, because we lose sight of what is authentically important to chase after and protect, and to give us a role in life. Oftentimes, the hero doesn't want to go down to the darkness anymore. You'd rather sit on your butt and play video games. That's less risky, but it calls out to you. The darkness, the depths, the unknown, whatever that looks like for you. To go on a sense of adventure, to give your life purpose, to seek out adventure and danger. And then coming back from that, because it's one thing to say, I faced it and ran away from it. It's another thing to say I've mastered it, and I have a relationship with it, and I came back stronger, and here's what I learned. I got a great story for you. If you want to follow with me on this hero's journey, click this video up here that YouTube recommends, and we can keep going with this.